"You look tired, sir," said the little alien girl. The man did not expect her to change his life forever. Carl staggered through the alien forest, his body covered in a network of cuts and deep scratches, his once sturdy exploration clothes torn to ragged shreds, the heavy composite bow slung across his back felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds against his exhausted muscles, and the handcrafted leather quiver at his side held only 3 precious arrows, each one meticulously fledged with the feathers of native birds, his once proud shoulders which had carried the responsibility of protecting his family in this hostile world, now slumped with the crushing weight of grief and bone-deep exhaustion. Every labored step through the underbrush was agony, every ragged breath a haunting reminder of what he had lost in the savage attack that had destroyed everything he cherished. The merciless memories refused to fade, despite his desperate desire to forget. His wife Sarah's gentle smile as she waved goodbye that morning, the sunlight catching in her chestnut hair as she stood at the doorway of their modest colonial settlement home, his 7-year-old daughter Emma's musical laughter as she played with the wooden animals he had carved for her on their settlement's rough-hewn floor, naming each one and creating elaborate stories about their adventures together, both gone now, violently ripped away by the monstrous shadow beast that had attacked while he was hunting beyond the valley. By the time he had returned following the column of dark smoke rising from the direction of home, there was nothing left but blood-soaked earth-splintered wood and the shattered remnants of a life he had worked so hard to build on this unforgiving planet. For 3 endless days Carl had wandered aimlessly through the dense wilderness of this cruel alien world, not caring whether he lived or died, almost hoping for the latter. His beard had grown wild and matted, his eyes hollow with grief and haunted by visions he could not unsee. He tripped over an exposed root system and fell hard to his knees, feeling the sharp stones beneath cut into his flesh, but welcoming the physical pain as a momentary distraction from the agony. His heart, a ragged cough tore through the strange, oppressive silence of the forest, echoing among trees that bore no resemblance to those of Earth. The air here was thicker than Earth's atmosphere, carrying unfamiliar scents of alien vegetation and mineral deposits that, even after months of colonization, remained disturbingly foreign. None of it mattered anymore. Nothing mattered when everything that had given his life purpose had been reduced to ashes and painful memories. A distant sound penetrated the fog of Carl's despair, the rhythmic percussion of water falling onto stone. Thirst suddenly overwhelmed him, his parched throat and cracked lips reminding his reluctant body that it still stubbornly clung to life, even as his wounded spirit longed to depart and join his family in oblivion. With trembling arms that protested every movement, he pushed himself up from the unforgiving ground and stumbled toward the promising sound, following it like a man in a trance. The dense forest gradually opened onto a small clearing where a cascading waterfall tumbled down a cliff face, composed of iridescent blue-violet stone, unlike any geological formation Carl had ever seen on Earth. The crystalline water caught the dim light of this world's distant sun, creating a spectacle of color that might once have moved him to appreciation or even wonder. Now Carl saw only the salvation of his parched throat and the possibility of prolonging a life he no longer valued, but could not bring himself to actively. And, as he approached the clear pool that gathered at the base of the waterfall, he noticed a small figure perched atop a moss-covered rock, perfectly still. Against the constant motion of the falling water, his hand instinctively moved to the hunting knife secured at his belt, his survivor's reflexes taking over, but he froze mid-motion when he realized who he was seeing before him, a child, a small girl with skin the color of the morning sky on Earth, her flowing white hair cascading down to her shoulders like a river of starlight. Against the azure backdrop of her features, she had unusually large, calm eyes that seemed to contain galaxies within their dark depths, watching him with neither fear nor judgment. She sat perfectly still, observing Carl with an expression of curious intensity that pierced through the protective numbness that had enveloped him. Carl stopped in his tracks, unsure what course of action to take. The colonists had encountered the native species of this planet before, tall, blue-skinned beings who maintained a cautious distance from the human settlements, but he had never been this close to one of them, certainly never to one of their children. Alone in the wilderness, his scientific mind dulled by grief but still functioning, wondered why this child was alone so far from her people and how she had survived in this dangerous environment. As he stood there dripping with sweat and blood, his breathing labored, the little alien girl tilted her head slightly and spoke in perfect, melodically accented English that surprised him with its clarity. "You look tired, sir," she said, her voice clear as a crystal bell, despite the rushing water that provided a constant background chorus to her words. Carl was too stunned to respond immediately. How did this child know his language? Why was she alone in this perilous wilderness? What was a young girl of her species doing so far from the protection of her people? Questions tumbled through his mind, providing a momentary respite from the endless replay of his tragedy. The blue-skinned girl stood up with graceful movements, revealing herself to be no taller than Carl's waist, and approached him without displaying any hint of fear or hesitation. "My name is Molly," she said, extending a small, delicate blue hand with elongated fingers. "You need water and rest before the night predators begin their hunt." Something in her voice, something in the simple kindness and wisdom of her observation made the iron grip of despair around Carl's heart loosen just a fraction, allowing him to feel something beyond grief for the first time in days. He didn't take her offered hand. He couldn't bring himself to touch another living being yet, as though his sorrow might be contagious. But he did manage a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Carl," he said, his voice hoarse and scratchy from disuse and dehydration, "my name is Carl." Molly smiled, revealing teeth as white as her flowing hair, seemingly untroubled by his reluctance to make physical contact. "Follow me, Carl of the Sky People. I know a place where you can find safety from the creatures that hunt." When the twin moons rise, he followed her, not because he particularly cared about safety or survival, but because he lacked the mental energy or will to do anything else. The rhythm of placing one foot in front of the other provided a simple focus that required no decisions, no thoughts of past or future. Molly led him along a narrow, barely visible path behind the thundering curtain of water, revealing a small cave Entrance hidden from view by the waterfall itself. The cave beyond was surprisingly dry and pleasantly warm with bioluminescent fungi growing along the walls, providing a soft blue-green light that reminded Carl of Earth's aurora borealis. Without asking permission or seeming concerned about his potentially dangerous presence, Miley took his dented metal water flask from his belt, disappeared momentarily through the waterfall, and returned with it filled to the brim with clear, cold water. She handed it back to him with a solemn expression that seemed too serious for her young face. "Drink," she commanded with the natural authority only a child can muster when dealing with an adult they perceive as needing help. "Then sleep. The forest has taken much from you. Your body must restore what has been lost before your journey continues." Carl did as he was told, mechanically, gulping down the cool, refreshing water before collapsing onto the unexpectedly soft moss that carpeted the cave floor. His body surrendered to exhaustion. Instantly, as darkness claimed his consciousness, he heard Miley humming softly nearby, a hauntingly beautiful melody unlike any human music he had ever heard. The gentle sound followed him into the first dreamless, merciful sleep he had experienced since losing everything that mattered in his world. When Carl awoke, the quality of light filtering through the watery curtain of the cave entrance had changed significantly, suggesting he had slept through the entire night and well into the following day. His body felt marginally less broken, though the weight of grief remained a constant pressure on his chest. Miley sat cross-legged at the entrance of the cave, skillfully weaving something intricate from local plant fibers, her small blue fingers moving with practiced precision. "You slept through the rising and setting of both moons," she observed, without turning to look at him, somehow sensing his return to wakefulness. "That is good. Healing needs deep sleep and the darkness of dreams to begin its work properly." Carl sat up stiffly, his body aching from injuries both treated and neglected, but his mind clearer than it had been since the attack. The fog of despair had not lifted, but had perhaps thinned enough for coherent thought to penetrate once more. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice still rough but stronger than before. Miley shrugged, her small blue shoulders rising and falling in a gesture surprisingly similar to human body language. "You needed help," she replied, as if that simple fact explained everything. "And I was here to provide it." Forest gives what is needed when it is needed to those who pay attention to its patterns. The simplicity and profound wisdom of her answer struck Carl like physical force. How long had it been since anything in his life had been simple? Since he had encountered kindness with no agenda? Since someone had seen his need and responded to it without question? These thoughts brought Sarah to mind. Her boundless compassion had been what first attracted him to her long before they had volunteered for the colonial expedition that had ultimately led to her death. "Your people," Carl managed after clearing his throat, "won't they be worried about you? Looking for you?" Miley's hands paused briefly in their weaving before resuming their rhythmic work. "My village lies 3 days' journey from here, across the river of stones where the great winged serpents make their nests. There was an attack by flesh rippers." Carl recognized the colonial term for the vicious predators they had encountered shortly after landing, and In the confusion of escape, I became separated from my family group. I have been waiting for a hunting party to find my trail, but the rains came and washed away my tracks. Her matter-of-fact explanation of what must have been a terrifying experience for a child her age further impressed Carl. This little girl had survived alone in one of the most dangerous environments he had ever encountered, maintaining not just her life but her composure as well. A spark of professional respect kindled within him, momentarily distracting him from his grief. "How long have you been alone?" he asked, genuine curiosity entering his voice. 7 cycles of the red moon," she replied, gesturing toward the sky beyond the waterfall. "I found this cave after the flesh rippers tracked me to my first shelter. They cannot pass through the water without making sounds that warn of their approach. Nearly 2 weeks alone in the wilderness." Carl calculated based on what the colonists had learned about this planet's lunar cycle. 2 weeks for a child no more than the equivalent of 8 Earth years old. His own daughter Emma would have been. The thought of Emma brought the crushing grief rushing back, threatening to drown him once more in its dark waters. He closed his eyes against the pain, his breath clear his throat, coming in short, sharp gasps. When he opened them again, he found Miley standing directly before him, her large eyes studying his face with disconcerting intensity. "Your heart carries a great burden," she said softly, "the weight of those who walk no more among the living. I can see them in your eyes like shadows passing over deep water." Carl swallowed hard, unable to respond. How could this alien child see so clearly what he could barely articulate to himself? "My people believe that grief is the price we pay for love," Miley continued, her young voice somehow conveying ancient wisdom. "The deeper the love, the heavier the grief clears throat when it is torn away. Your grief must be very great indeed." Something broke inside Carl then. Not healing, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of accepting that healing might someday be possible. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek, the first he had allowed himself since finding the ruins of his home and family. "They were everything to me," he whispered hoarsely. Miley nodded solemnly. "Then they must have been very beautiful souls to claim such a place in your heart. Among my people we honor the departed by living in a way that would make them proud of us. Is it the same among the sky people?" The question, asked with such innocent curiosity, pierced through Carl's protective shell of despair. Would Sarah be proud of what he had become in her absence? Would Emma recognize the hollow shell of a man who had once been her father, who had taught her to be brave and kind even when facing difficulties? He knew the answer, and the knowledge was another kind of pain, but one that carried the seeds of purpose rather than despair. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm that gradually brought Carl back from the precipice of self-destruction. Each morning he would venture into the surrounding forest to hunt small game. His years of experience as a colonial scout and survivalist allowing him to catch enough food for both of them, despite his unfamiliarity with the local fauna. His movements, at first mechanical and lifeless, slowly regained some of their former fluid precision as muscle memory and training reasserted themselves over grief. Miley would gather edible plants and fruits she knew to be safe for human consumption, displaying an encyclopedic knowledge of the local flora that impressed Carl's scientific mind. She explained which plants could heal wounds, which could ease pain, and which could bring sickness or death if prepared incorrectly. Carl found himself absorbing this knowledge with the same focused attention he had once applied to learning the terrain around the colonial settlement, his natural curiosity gradually reawakening. In the evenings they would sit by a small, carefully tended fire at the mouth of the cave, far enough from the waterfall to avoid the spray, but close enough to use it as an escape route if needed. Carl would methodically prepare their meals, cleaning and preparing the strange alien game with the same care he had once applied to Earth animals during survival training. Without conscious decision, he found himself silently demonstrating his techniques to Miley: how to skin the creatures without damaging the valuable hide, how to identify and remove inedible organs, how to properly cook the meat to enhance its flavor and eliminate any harmful organisms it might harbor. Miley watched with rapt attention, her large eyes missing nothing, absorbing every detail of his demonstrations with remarkable focus for a child her age. She asked thoughtful questions that revealed a keen intelligence, wanting to understand not just the how, but the why of each step in the process. The first time he handed her a piece of properly cooked meat from one of the purple-furred rabbit-like creatures that inhabited the forest understory. She examined it with careful curiosity before taking a cautious bite. Her eyes widened with surprise, then unmistakable pleasure at the new taste experience. The flesh tastes different when treated with fire, she observed, stronger but less bitter than when eaten as the forest provides it. A small smile touched Carl's lips at her reaction, the first in what felt like a lifetime. The expression felt foreign on his face, like a forgotten language suddenly remembered. Cooking breaks down certain compounds in the meat, he explained, finding himself slipping into the teaching role that had once been a significant part of his life as a parent. It makes the nutrients more accessible and kills harmful microorganisms that might make us sick. Your people have much wisdom about the preparation of food, Miley said, appreciatively, taking another bite. My tribe eats most meat as it comes from the hunt, though we dry some for times when hunting is poor. Perhaps I could show your people how to find the sweetest fruits and the healing roots in exchange for this knowledge of fire treatment. The casual mention of your people sent a pang through Carl as he remembered that he no longer had a people. The colonial outpost that had been his home had been effectively destroyed, the few survivors evacuated to the main settlement hundreds of kilometers away. He had chosen to remain behind, ostensibly to track the creature that had attacked them, but in reality because he could not bear to continue living among reminders of what he had lost. My people are gone, he said flatly, the brief lightness he had felt evaporating. The settlement was destroyed. Those who survived went elsewhere. Miley tilted her head regarding him with that disconcerting perceptiveness. Yet you remain. Why? The direct question caught Carl off guard. Why had he stayed knowing it meant almost certain death? The answer rose unbidden in his mind. Because death was what he had been seeking, though he lacked the courage or conviction to actively end his own life. Instead, he had walked into the wilderness hoping the planet would finish what the Shade Beast had begun. I stayed to hunt the creature that killed my family, he said instead. Partial truth easier to speak aloud. The beast your people call the Shade Beast. Maylee's expression grew solemn, almost fearful. The Eater of Light walks these forests. Again, the elders spoke of such a creature in the stories of the long dark, but many believed it had passed into the realm of myth. It's real, Carl said grimly, his hand unconsciously moving to the knife at his belt. Very real. And it will kill again unless it's stopped. Maylee studied him with those ancient eyes set in the child's face. One hunter alone cannot stand against the Eater of Light, the stories say it took many warriors working together to drive it back into the Shadowlands. During the time of my great-grandparents' great-grandparents. Carl had no answer for that. She was right, of course. His quest for vengeance or for an honorable death that would end his suffering was futile against such a powerful adversary. Yet what alternative did he have? Despite the routine they established, nights remained difficult for Carl. In the darkness of the cave, with no distractions to occupy his mind, memories would resurface with brutal clarity. He would see Sarah's face contorted in terror, hear Emma's desperate screams echoing through their home, smell the acrid combination of blood and burning that had greeted him when he returned to the settlement. In vivid, horrific detail, he would relive the moment he found their broken bodies, the knowledge that he had failed in his most fundamental duty to protect them, crushing him anew with each remembrance. In his fitful dreams, the massive, shadowy beast with its glowing ember eyes would materialize from the darkness, its form somehow more terrifying for being indistinct and otherworldly. Carl would find himself paralyzed, unable to move or fight back as the creature approached his helpless family. He would try to scream warnings that never emerged from his throat, reach for weapons his dream self could never grasp, and ultimately watch in helpless horror as history repeated itself with merciless precision. On one particularly bad night, he awoke with a strangled cry caught in his throat, his heart pounding like a trapped animal against his ribs, his body drenched in cold sweat despite the warmth of the cave, as his eyes adjusted to the dim bioluminescent light. He found Mealy sitting nearby, her face etched with concern beyond her years, watching over him as one might watch over a wounded creature that might lash out in its pain. The bad dreams came again, she said quietly. It wasn't a question, but a statement of observed fact. Carl nodded wordlessly, his throat too tight with emotion to speak immediately. My people say dreams are messages from the spirit world, Molly continued, her voice gentle as flowing water. Messages that our waking minds cannot hear because we make too much noise with our thoughts. What message comes to you in these dark visions, Carl of the Sky People? Death, he whispered, the word escaping before he could contain it. Only death and failure. I should have been there. I should have protected them. Molly considered his words with a seriousness that seemed beyond her years, her expression thoughtful rather than pitying. Perhaps, or perhaps you would now be walking the spirit paths with them, and neither of us would be sitting here in this cave, sharing food and knowledge. She leaned forward slightly. You survived for a reason, Carl. The patterns of the universe rarely reveal themselves immediately, but they exist. Nonetheless, what possible reason could there be for me to live while they died? Carl asked, bitterness seeping into his voice. What cosmic pattern could justify that? Molly gestured toward the cave entrance, where the first pale light of dawn was beginning to filter through the waterfall. The seed does not know why it alone survives when others of its kind are consumed by forest creatures. The sapling does not understand why the lightning strikes its neighbor instead. Understanding comes later, if at all. She fixed him with those depthless eyes. But you still live, that is an undeniable truth, regardless of whether you yet understand the purpose. The simple observation hung between them, in the pre-dawn darkness, unanswerable, and yet profound in its implication. Carl had no response that wouldn't sound hollow, so he simply nodded, acknowledging her wisdom without necessarily accepting its application to his situation. As days transformed into weeks, Carl found himself gradually regaining physical strength, if not emotional wholeness. The wound in his soul remained raw and painful, a constant presence that colored every moment of his existence. But his body remembered what it meant to survive in hostile environments, drawing on training and experience that predated his life as a colonist and family man. Molly continued to surprise him with her resilience, wisdom, and adaptability. She never pressed him to discuss his past or the family he had lost, seeming to instinctively understand that such conversations needed to unfold naturally, or not at all. Instead, her presence served as a gentle but persistent reminder that he was not alone in this alien wilderness, that connection with another living being remained possible despite his loss. One crisp morning, they ventured deeper into the forest than usual, tracking a herd of deer-like creatures with purple-tinged fur that Molly called dusk dancers because of their habit of performing elaborate mating rituals. As the light faded from the sky, Carl had spotted their distinctive three-toed tracks near the waterfall and suggested following them to potentially secure larger game than the small forest creatures they had been subsisting on. The trail led them through increasingly unfamiliar terrain, but Carl's tracking skills kept them on course despite the alien environment. Molly moved alongside him with the silent grace of someone born to the forest, occasionally pointing out signs he might have missed. A disturbed patch of moss, a broken twig, with sap still oozing from the break, indicating the herd had passed recently. Suddenly, piercing screams cut through to quiet of the forest, sending flocks of iridescent bird-like creatures scattering into the air from nearby trees. Carl's hunter instincts kicked in immediately, his body tensing as adrenaline flooded his system. He signaled for Miley to stay low and hidden, impressed when she instantly complied without question, demonstrating the trust they had built over their weeks together, moving with the controlled stealth that had once made him the colony's best scout. Carl advanced toward the source of the distress, using the dense underbrush for cover. Miley followed at a safe distance, her movements nearly as silent as his own. Despite her lack of formal training, they emerged at the edge of a small, rocky clearing to witness a scene of impending violence. A group of blue-skinned beings, unmistakably Miley's people, stood with their backs to a cliff face surrounded by two snarling predators that Carl instantly recognized. The creatures were quadrupedal with sleek black bodies covered in chitinous armor plates, 6 in retractable claws, and elongated jaws filled with interlocking teeth. The colonial security forces had named them Flesh Rippers after the first fatal encounter, a designation that had proven grimly accurate in subsequent attacks. Several of the aliens were already injured, bright purple blood staining their simple clothing of woven plant fibers and cured hides. They held makeshift spears crafted from tree branches, but their defensive formation was disorganized, their movements betraying panic rather than coordination. Carl counted 8 adults and 2 adolescents, all displaying varying degrees of injury and exhaustion. Without conscious thought or hesitation, Carl unslung his bow from his shoulder and knocked one of his precious remaining arrows. The familiar motion came as naturally as breathing, muscle memory taking over as he drew back the composite string with practiced strength. He exhaled slowly, sighted down the shaft and released in one fluid motion, born of years of training and survival necessity. The arrow flew true, covering the distance to the nearest predator in a heartbeat and burying itself deep in the creature's eye socket, one of the few vulnerable points in its armored body. The Flesh Ripper collapsed with a high-pitched howl of agony, its legs spasming briefly before it lay still. The second beast spun toward the new threat, its primitive brain registering the death of its hunting partner and identifying the source of danger. Before it could charge, Carl had already knocked his second-to-last arrow. This shot struck the predator in the throat just below its armored jaw, penetrating deep into vital structures. The creature staggered, wounded but not immediately killed, before retreating into the dense underbrush with an angry snarl of pain, leaving a trail of dark ichor in its wake. The group of aliens stared in Carl's direction, their large eyes wide with a mixture of fear, awe, and cautious relief. One of them, an older male with elaborately braided white hair and ceremonial scarring across his blue chest, stepped forward hesitantly, gnarled wooden staff gripped tightly in his hands. "You saved us, human," he said in heavily accented but understandable English, each word carefully pronounced as if rarely used. "We are in your debt. According to the ancient laws of the forest." Carl lowered his bow, surprised by the alien's knowledge of human language. "Your people speak our tongue?" he asked, stepping fully into the clearing but maintaining a cautious distance. The elder nodded solemnly. "Some among the Zila tribe learned the speech of the sky people who came before in the great metal birds. I am Eldrin, voice of the ancestors and keeper of the sacred history." Melee chose that moment to emerge from hiding, darting past Carl to rush toward the group of aliens. "Mother," she cried out in her native language, the unfamiliar sounds melodic despite her obvious emotion. A female with intricate silver markings on her face pushed forward from the group, her expression transforming from weary exhaustion to overwhelming joy. "Melee, my daughter," she exclaimed, dropping to her knees to enfold the child in a desperate embrace. "We thought you lost to the beasts of the deep forest. We have searched for you through 7 cycles of both moons. I found safety with Carl," Melee explained, turning to gesture toward the human while remaining within her mother's embrace. "He is a great hunter from the sky people. He has shared his knowledge of fire cooking and his protection while I waited for the search parties to find my trail. All eyes returned to Carl, who shifted uncomfortably under their collective gaze. He had avoided contact with others, human or alien, since the tragedy, finding solitude preferable to the awkward sympathy or thinly veiled pity that human interaction inevitably brought. Now confronted with the grateful attention of these aliens, he felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger. "Please," said Eldrin, taking another step forward and gesturing toward Carl's bow with a blue hand that trembled slightly from age or exertion. "Our tribe suffers greatly in these dark days. The flesh rippers grow bolder with each passing moon, venturing closer to our sacred groves and hunting grounds. Many of our strongest hunters have fallen to their jaws, leaving our children hungry and our elders unprotected." The old alien's voice grew more impassioned as he continued, revealing the depth of his people's desperation. And GT, clears throat. And GT, we have little food stores remaining. And fear rules our nights when the predators are most active. If you would share your hunting knowledge, your weapon craft, the elders' words trailed off, but his meaning was unmistakably clear in the pleading look that transcended species differences. Carl's first instinct was to refuse immediately, to return to the isolation of the waterfall cave with or without Melee, to continue his solitary existence until fate or the shade beast claimed him. The thought of integrating with any community, of forming new bonds that might one day be severed as brutally as his family ties had been, sent a cold shudder through his core. Yet as he looked at the frightened, hopeful faces before him, as he saw the genuine love between Melee and her mother, felt the weight of Eldrin's desperate plea. Something stirred in Carl's chest, a feeling he had thought dead and buried alongside his wife and daughter, a sense of purpose and connection that had once defined his existence before grief had hollowed him out. His gaze returned to Melee, who watched him with those impossibly deep eyes that seemed to see through his protective layers of pain and isolation. This child had saved him, not just by providing shelter and companionship, but by reminding him of his humanity when he was on the verge of surrendering it completely. Now she needed her people, and they clearly needed protection. Protection he was uniquely qualified to provide. In that pivotal moment, Carl realized he had been given something he never expected: a second chance. Not to erase his failure to protect Sarah and Emma, not to undo the past, to escape his grief, but perhaps to redeem it in some small way by using his skills to prevent others from experiencing a similar loss. "I can teach you to defend yourselves," he said finally, his voice stronger and more resolved than it had been in weeks, to hunt more effectively and to fight when necessary. But it won't be easy, and it will require changes to how you live and think about survival. Relief washed over Eldrin's weathered face, his shoulders relaxing visibly. "We are willing to learn all that you would teach, Carl of the Sky People. Our very survival as a tribe depends upon it, and the Zila have never feared necessary change when the patterns of existence demand adaptation." Molly slipped from her mother's embrace and returned to Carl's side, looking up at him with an expression that combined gratitude with something deeper, a recognition of the significant choice he had just made. The forest provides what is needed, she said softly, echoing her words from days earlier, sometimes in unexpected forms. Carl placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, the casual contact, representing a significant breakthrough in his emotional healing. So it seems, he agreed quietly. The Zila village was unlike anything Carl had ever encountered, either on Earth or since arriving on this alien world, built among the lower branches of enormous tree-like growths with phosphorescent blue bark. The settlement consisted of multiple platform dwellings, connected by intricate rope bridges and ladders crafted from vines and flexible wood. The organic architecture blended so seamlessly with the natural environment that Carl might have walked directly beneath it without noticing its existence had he not been guided there by the hunting party. The elevated position offered excellent protection from ground-based predators, but significantly limited the tribe's ability to hunt, gather, or defend their territory beyond the immediate vicinity of their arboreal sanctuary. When Carl arrived with Molly and the rescued party, the entire Zila tribe emerged from their dwellings to witness the unprecedented sight of a human warrior walking among them as a guest, rather than a distant curiosity to be avoided. Children with varying shades of blue skin, some almost turquoise while others approached deep cobalt, pointed and whispered from behind their parents' legs. Elders with elaborate facial markings and white hair bound in complex braids studied him with cautious interest. Warriors, identifiable by the ceremonial scars on their arms and chest, assessed him with professional curiosity, their eyes lingering on his bow and the knife at his belt. That evening, around a central fire pit constructed on the largest platform at the heart of the village, Eldrin explained to Carl how their once peaceful existence had been shattered by increasingly aggressive predator behavior over the past year. The tribal leader's voice grew heavy with emotion as he recounted the losses they had suffered. Hunters who never returned from expeditions, children snatched during rare moments of inattention, entire gathering parties found torn apart in areas that had previously been safe for generations. Something has disturbed the ancient balance of the forest, the elder said gravely, his lined face illuminated by the dancing flames. The flesh rippers no longer respect the boundaries established in the time of my ancestors. They hunt in larger packs, coordinating their attacks in ways we have never witnessed before, and there are rumors from the far tribes, rumors of something worse. Eldrin then leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless carried to all gathered around the fire. A shadow that walks on two legs like the people yet stands taller than our mightiest warriors, a creature with eyes like burning embers that leave trails of light in the darkness, a beast that seems to think and plan rather than merely hunt by instinct. Carl's blood ran cold at the description, his hands unconsciously clenching into white-knuckled fists. The elder's words painted a perfect picture of the monstrosity that had haunted his nightmares and destroyed his family, the beast that colonial security had only glimpsed at a distance but which Carl had seen with terrible clarity amidst the wreckage of his home. The Shade Beast, he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a curse. Eldrin's eyes widened, the vertical pupils dilating with sudden intensity. You know of this creature, this eater of light? Carl nodded slowly, aware that every member of the tribe was now focused entirely on him, the atmospheric tension palpable as they awaited his response. "I know it," he confirmed, his voice hardening with barely contained rage and grief. "It destroyed my settlement, killed my people, my—" He faltered briefly before forcing himself to continue. "My wife and daughter were among those lost." Hushed murmur rippled through the gathered tribe members. Miley, sitting beside her mother across the fire from Carl, watched him with a mixture of sorrow and understanding that belied her young age. Several warriors touched their ceremonial scars in what Carl recognized as a gesture of respect for fallen comrades, even those of another species. "Then our fates are bound together by shared suffering," said Elder Rin, solemnly touching his own scarred chest. "This creature threatens both our peoples, disrupting the balance of existence that has sustained the forest since time beyond memory. Will you help us prepare against this darkness, Carl of Earth? Will you teach us to defend ourselves as you defended our hunting party today?" Carl looked around at the anxious faces of the Xyla people, at parents holding children close, at warriors eager to protect their tribe but lacking the knowledge to do so effectively, at elders whose wisdom encompassed many things but not the tactical experience needed for this new threat. His gaze finally settled on Molly, who had saved him from the abyss of his grief with her simple kindness and wisdom. She met his eyes across the fire, and in her expression he saw neither demand nor expectation, only calm acceptance of whatever choice he might make. In that moment, Carl made a decision that would forever alter his path on this alien world. "I will teach you everything I know about survival and defense," he said, his voice carrying clearly around the fire circle. "Together we will make this village secure against the flesh rippers." He paused, his expression hardening with determination. "And when the time comes, we will hunt the shade beast." The next morning, Carl began assessing the Xyla tribe's defensive capabilities with the methodical thoroughness that had once made him an invaluable member of the colonial security team. He examined their current weapons, crude spears tipped with sharpened stone or bone slings for hurling small projectiles, and simple knives fashioned from flint-like material. While functional for basic hunting, these implements were grossly inadequate against predators like the flesh rippers, to say nothing of the shade beast. "We need to start by improving your weapons," Carl explained to the gathered warriors, who listened with intense concentration. "Better weapons mean more successful hunts, which means more food and materials. They also mean better defense when hunting isn't goal." He demonstrated how to select the optimal wood for bow making, identifying trees with the right combination of flexibility and strength, using his own hunting knife, high-carbon steel blade that represent technology far beyond the Xyla's current capabilities. He showed them how to properly cut and shape the wood, how to cure it to prevent warping, and how to string it using fibers from native plants that Molly helped identify. "The key to survival isn't just having weapons," Carl explained as he worked, finding himself slipping naturally into the teaching role he had performed for younger colonists. "It's understanding your environment, reading the signs it provides, and adapting your clears throat approach based on what you learn." Miley remained by his side throughout. Much of this instruction, serving Clear's throat as both eager student and invaluable translator when his explanations became too technical or abstract for the tribe's limited English vocabulary. To Carl's continued surprise, she showed exceptional aptitude for archery once properly scaled bows were constructed for the younger tribe members. Her small stature belied her strength, and her natural intuition for trajectory and timing made her a remarkably quick study. The target is not where it appears to be, Carl explained to her as she prepared to loose an arrow at a knot on a distant tree. You must aim where it will be when the arrow arrives, accounting for the time the projectile needs to travel and any factors that might affect its path. Miley nodded in understanding, adjusted her aim slightly upward to compensate for distance, and released. The arrow flew true, striking the target dead center. Carl found himself unable to suppress a smile of genuine pride at her accomplishment. You're a natural archer, he told her as she retrieved her arrow. Your size gives you advantages, steady hands, good balance, and a lower profile that makes you harder to spot. Miley beamed with pride at his praise, her blue features lighting up with pleasure. I have a good teacher who explains the why behind the how, she replied, repeating his own words from an earlier lesson. Understanding the reasons makes the actions clearer. As weeks passed, the Zella village underwent a remarkable transformation. Under Carl's guidance, the platforms and bridges that formed their arboreal home were reinforced and expanded. Under his direction, they constructed a series of defensive walls and hidden pits around the perimeter of the ground beneath their village, incorporating sharpened stakes and camouflage traps designed to funnel approaching predators into killing zones where archers could target them from protected positions. Hunting parties, now properly armed and trained in coordinated tactics, ventured out with new confidence, bringing back more game than the tribe had seen in months. Food stores began to accumulate, improving the overall health and morale of the community. The children no longer huddled in fear at every strange sound from the forest, but watched the training sessions with excitement, wielding miniature versions of the weapons Carl had designed, practicing combat movements under the watchful eyes of the adult warriors. Carl himself was changing too, though more subtly. The physical labor and constant activity left little time for brooding on his losses, forcing his mind to engage with present challenges rather than past tragedies. The hollow, haunted look that had dominated his eyes gradually gave way to a steady, determined gaze that reflected his renewed sense of purpose. The grief remained a constant companion that colored his perception of the world, but it no longer threatened to consume him entirely as it once had. He didn't smile often. The capacity for genuine joy still felt distant and possibly irretrievable. But when Miley mastered a particularly difficult technique, or when the tribe successfully implemented one of his defensive strategies, a brief expression of satisfaction would cross his weathered features, hinting at the man he had been before tragedy struck. The Zella embraced Carl's teachings with enthusiasm and dedication that impressed him deeply. Despite the vast differences in their biology and cultural background, he found them quick learners who approached new ideas with open minds and persistent determination. They lacked humanities, technological advantages, but compensated with intimate knowledge of their environment and natural adaptations that humans could never match. Their night vision, for instance, far exceeded human capabilities, allowing scouting parties to maintain vigilance during the dangerous nocturnal hours when most predators were active. Their unique ability to perceive subtle temperature variations helped them track prey and identify potential threats by detecting body heat through dense vegetation. These natural advantages, when combined with Carl's tactical training and improved weapons, began to shift the balance of power in their ongoing struggle against the forest dangers. One evening, as Carl sat outside his ground-level dwelling, a sturdy structure the tribe had constructed for him near the base of their village, trees Maylee approached carrying two carved wooden cups containing a steaming liquid with a pleasant herbal aroma. Niblum tea, she explained, offering one cup to him with a formal grace that characterized many zealous social interactions. It gives strength to the spirit when darkness approaches and clarity to thoughts that become tangled in worry. Carl accepted the cup with a nod of thanks, recognizing the ritual significance of the offering. Among the Zella, he had learned sharing tea represented trust and connection beyond mere cooperation. They sat together on a fallen log, watching the three moons of this alien world rise in their complex dance across the star-filled sky, bathing the forest in multi-hued light that transformed the familiar landscape into something otherworldly and beautiful. Tomorrow we begin patrol training for the outer perimeter, Carl said, eventually breaking the comfortable silence between them. Your mother has finally agreed that you can join the scout team, given your progress with the bow and your natural talents for observation. Maylee's eyes brightened with excitement. The bioluminescent markings that had recently begun to develop along her temples, signs of approaching adolescence, he had learned, glowing more intensely with her emotional response. Truly, but she has been so protective since I returned to the village. I feared she would never allow me beyond the inner defensive ring. You've earned the right to join the Scouts, Carl replied simply, sipping the aromatic tea that had become a regular part of his evening routine. You see patterns and details that others miss, even among your own people. That's an invaluable skill for a scout, whose observations might save many lives. It was true. Beyond her aptitude for archery, Maylee possessed an uncanny ability to sense danger before others detected it. She could read subtle changes in the forest environment, the sudden absence of insect sounds, minute shifts in wind direction, the barely perceptible movement of undergrowth that often signaled approaching threats long before they became visible. Carl had come to trust her instincts implicitly, a level of confidence he had extended to very few people in his life. Even before the tragedy, Carl, Maylee said after another comfortable moment of shared silence, her voice taking on the serious tone that often preceded her most insightful observations. Are you still carrying the burning anger inside your chest, the one that consumed you when we first met by the singing waters? The question caught him unprepared, cutting through his carefully maintained focus on present tasks and future preparations. He considered deflecting with a technical discussion of upcoming training exercises. but something about the genuine concern in her expression compelled honesty. Instead, yes, he admitted, staring into the depths of his tea rather than meeting her penetrating gaze. But it's different now than it was before. The anger hasn't diminished, but it's changed its nature. Before I met you, the rage and grief were all consuming, like a fire that was burning me alive from within. Now those feelings are still present, but they've become more focused, more controlled, a tool rather than a master. He looked up then, finding Miley watching him with an expression of deep understanding that seemed incongruous on her young face, but perfectly aligned with the old soul that seemed to dwell behind her eyes. The anger is still there, but it's no longer all that I am. I've become more than my grief again, even if I'll never be who I was before. Miley nodded as if this explanation perfectly matched her own observations. Anger can function like fire in many ways, she said thoughtfully, her gaze shifting to the flames of the central village hearth visible through the trees. Unchecked, it consumes everything in its path, including the vessel that contains it. But properly channeled and respected, it provides warmth, protection, and the energy to transform raw materials into something useful. She looked back at Carl. The elders say that no emotion is inherently destructive. Only our relationship with it determines whether it strengthens or weakens us. Carl studied her with renewed appreciation, continually amazed by the wisdom contained within this child from a species so different from his own. When did you become so philosophically astute, little one? He asked, the question only half teasing. She grinned. In response, her expression suddenly childlike again, revealing the gap one of her primary teeth had recently fallen out to make way for its adult replacement. I am hardly little anymore, she protested with mock indignation. I have witnessed 8 complete cycles of the great sun's journey among my people. That is the threshold of understanding when we begin formal instruction in the deeper knowledge of the forest patterns. Ancient indeed, Carl replied with dry humor, surprising himself with a soft chuckle, a rusty, unfamiliar sound that emerged from somewhere he had thought permanently silenced by grief. Nearly decrepit. I should be asking you for wisdom, not the other way around. Miley laughed in response, the sound like clear water flowing over stones, and for a brief, precious moment, Carl felt something that resembled peace settle over him. Not happiness perhaps, but a temporary respite from the constant ache of loss that had become his constant companion. The peaceful interlude was shattered by a sudden, urgent blast from one of the hollow wood warning horns positioned around the village perimeter. Carl was on his feet instantly, bow in hand and quiver slung over his shoulder. Before the echo had fully dissipated, Miley jumped up beside him, her expression immediately transforming from youthful mirth to focused alertness, her hand moving to the knife at her belt with practiced efficiency. Attack signal, she said unnecessarily, already moving toward the source of the alarm. They raced through the underbrush, joined by other warriors emerging from their dwellings with weapons at the ready. Carl noted with approval that the Zilla were responding with the disciplined urgency he had drilled into them during countless practice alerts, grabbing appropriate weapons and moving to predetermined defense positions without panic or confusion. A far cry from the disorganized fear he had witnessed upon his arrival months earlier. At the eastern perimeter wall, a scout named Tareth pointed urgently into the darkness beyond the sharpened stake. Barrier. Flesh rippers, he reported tersely in the Zilla language which Carl had begun to understand in simple context. Many moving fast through the shad. Fern Grove approaching in hunting formation. Carl scanned the tree line, his human eyes less effective than the Zella's in the complex shadows created by the three moons' overlapping light. Nevertheless, his trained observers' instincts allowed him to detect the subtle movement patterns that betrayed the predator's presence, shifting shadows that moved against the breeze, the momentary reflection of moonlight on Shedna's armor plates, the unnatural stillness of prey, animals paralyzed by proximity to danger. At least 12 individuals, he assessed, grimly, noting the unprecedented size of the pack, maybe more concealed in the deeper shadows. They're approaching in a crescent formation, trying to surround our eastern defenses. He turned to Bowerin, the senior warrior, who had become his most capable lieutenant over the past months. Signal the northern and southern towers. This may be a diversion meant to draw our attention while another group attacks from a different direction. Bowerin nodded sharply and issued a series of bird-like calls that would alert the watchers without revealing their knowledge of the ambush to the approaching predators. Carl turned back to the assembled defenders, his mind rapidly calculating tactical options based on the terrain, available forces, and enemy numbers. Positions, he commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of experience. Archers to the elevated platforms, first line of spear wielders. Behind the barrier stakes, second line. In support formation, 10 paces back. Reserve force at the village core, ready to reinforce any breach point. His eyes found Miley among the gathering defenders. Scout team to the observation posts, watch for flanking movements and signal at the first sign of additional threats. The Zella warriors moved with impressive discipline, taking their assigned positions without hesitation or confusion. Miley climbed nimbly to her designated observation post in the lower branches of a massive tree, her bow secured across her back, her eyes already scanning the forest for signs of additional danger. Carl wanted to order her to safety, but respected both her earned position and the tribe's cultural approach to danger, which acknowledged that all members had roles to play in survival, regardless of age. Carl himself took position with the main defense force. The massive bone sword he had crafted from the femur of a giant herd beast gripped confidently in his hands. The weapon, though primitive by colonial standards, had been meticulously shaped and hardened through processes Carl had developed by combining human metallurgical knowledge with Zella traditional techniques. Its edge, honed to razor sharpness through countless hours of careful work, had proven capable of penetrating even the armored hide of adult flesh rippers. The attack came with frightening speed and coordination that confirmed Carl's growing suspicion that something was altering the natural behavior patterns of the forest predators. The flesh rippers charged from multiple directions simultaneously, their distinctive high-pitched hunting calls splitting the night air. Their movements displayed a level of tactical awareness that should have been impossible for creatures driven primarily by instinct. suggesting an intelligence directing their efforts, a possibility that sent a chill down Carl's spine despite the warmth of the night. The Zella were ready, however. Arrows rained down on the charging predators from elevated positions, each shaft finding vulnerable points with deadly accuracy. Eye sockets, throat junctions, the softer underside when a creature reared to climb the barriers. Those predators that reached the perimeter defenses impaled themselves on carefully positioned sharpened stakes or fell into concealed pits lined with poison spikes. Carl fought alongside the spear wielders when several particularly large flesh rippers breached the first line of defense. His bone sword cleaved through armor plates that would have turned aside the tribe's stone weapons, his strength and combat experience evident in every precisely calculated strike. Around him, Zella warriors fought with coordinated efficiency that would have impressed his former colonial security colleagues, maintaining formation integrity while supporting each other against the savage attackers. For 20 frenetic minutes, the battle raged across the eastern perimeter. 3 Zella sustained significant injuries but none fatal, a remarkable achievement considering the ferocity of the assault. When the last of the surviving predators retreated into the forest with angry, pain-filled howls, a cheer of triumph rose from the defending warriors, echoing through the trees and causing night birds to take flight in startled confusion. Carl did not join in the celebration. However, something about the attack pattern bothered him deeply, a nagging sense that they had witnessed not a simple predator raid, but something more ominous. Flesh rippers were dangerous ambush hunters with rudimentary pack behaviors, but they lacked the cognitive capacity to coordinate such a massive, multi-directional assault. Their behavior seemed almost military in its precision, as though they had been deliberately deployed as a fighting force rather than simply hunting for food. It was almost as if they had been driven, controlled, directed with purpose by something with greater intelligence. His suspicions were confirmed 3 days later when a hunting party returned to the village well ahead of schedule, their faces etched with barely contained fear that immediately set the entire community on edge. The lead hunter, a respected warrior named Corvin, who had become one of Carl's most dedicated students, approached Eldrin and Carl directly, bypassing the normal ritual greetings that typically preceded formal reports. Tracks, he gasped, his chest heaving from what had clearly been a sustained run through difficult terrain. Massive tracks heading directly toward the village boundary and the forest. He shuddered visibly, an uncharacteristic display of emotion from the typically stoic warrior. The forest grows silent and cold before it, as though the very soil fears its passage. The shade beast, Carl said, his voice hardening into something cold and implacable as the pieces fell into place. With terrible clarity. It's coming, and I believe it's been controlling the flesh rippers somehow, using them as scouts and advance forces to test our defenses. An emergency council was called immediately, with the tribe's elders gathering alongside the senior warriors in the central meeting platform. The atmosphere was tense, charged with a combination of fear and grim determination as Carl explained his theory about the coordinated attacks they had been experiencing. This creature is unlike anything I've encountered before, he told the assembled leaders, his voice steady Despite the turmoil of emotions the topic evoked, based on what I witnessed at my settlement and what we've seen here, it possesses intelligence far beyond normal. Predators. It studies its prey, learns their weaknesses, and plans its approach accordingly. What options remain to us? Asked one of the elder females, her face lined with concern for the children and non-warriors under her protection. Should we abandon the village? Seek refuge deeper in the forest where this shadow cannot find us? No, countered Balron firmly, touching the fresh battle scars on his arm from the recent flesh ripper attack. Running would only delay the inevitable. This creature would track us, perhaps, driving us into territory even more dangerous than our current position. We must stand and fight on ground we know, with defenses we have prepared. All eyes turned expectantly to Carl, whose expertise in combat matters had earned him a position of remarkable respect within the tribal hierarchy. Despite his status as an outsider, the Zila he had discovered valued practical wisdom regardless of its source, making them far more adaptable than many human colonial factions he had encountered. We fight, he confirmed, supporting Baron's assessment, but not as we fought the flesh rippers. This enemy is different, smarter, stronger, and possessing capabilities we don't fully understand yet. His jaw tightened involuntarily as unwanted memories surfaced. I've seen firsthand what it can do when people are unprepared. We won't make the same mistakes. For the next 7 intensive days, the village transformed into a hive of coordinated activity unlike anything Carl had witnessed since his arrival. Under his direction, the Zila constructed elaborate traps and defensive mechanisms around the entire perimeter. Not simple pits or stake walls, but complex systems designed to immobilize and damage a much larger, more intelligent predator. Some traps utilized counterweighted log structures that would swing down from concealed positions in the trees when triggered, capable of delivering crushing force. Others employed carefully designed nets, woven from the strongest vines available, treated with paralytic toxins extracted from native plants under Molly's expert guidance. Weapon production accelerated with every capable adult and adolescent working to create arrows tipped with the sharpest bone and hardest stone, coated with poison specifically formulated to affect larger targets. Throughout this feverish preparation, Molly remained constantly at Carl's side, her quick mind often improving upon his initial designs with insights born of her people's intimate knowledge of forest materials and their properties. Her connection to the natural environment proved invaluable as she helped identify the most effective approach routes for the shade beast, based on terrain features and animal behavior patterns, allowing them to concentrate their defensive preparations where they would prove most effective. The Eater of Light will approach from the western ravine, she explained with quiet certainty as they surveyed potential entry points to the village area. The stones there absorb moonlight and release darkness. Such places draw it like water draws the thirsty. Carl had learned to trust such pronouncements, having witnessed too many instances where Miles' seemingly mystical observations proved to have concrete tactical value when properly interpreted. He adjusted their defensive layout accordingly, positioning their strongest traps and most skilled warriors to cover the western approach without neglecting other potential vectors. The village settled into a state of hypervigilance, waiting, every member aware that they faced an existential threat that might arrive at any moment, yet rather than succumbing to paralyzing fear, the community displayed a remarkable resilience that earned Carl's deepest respect. Children continued their lessons, albeit with more emphasis on emergency procedures. Hunting and gathering proceeded under increased security. Life continued, adapted to the new reality but not surrendered to it. Carl found himself thinking of the colonial settlement where he had lived with Sarah and Emma. How differently they might have fared had they possessed the zealot's cohesion and adaptability. The thought brought pain, as all memories of his family did, but now that pain was accompanied by a sense of purpose rather than merely despair. He was using the hard lessons of his loss to prevent others from suffering a similar fate, creating meaning from tragedy in a way Sarah would have understood and approved. The night the shade beast finally came was marked by an unnatural stillness that seemed to press against the skin like a physical presence. No insects chirped their usual evening chorus, no night birds called to establish territory. A heavy expectant silence blanketed the forest, as if the ecosystem itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what approached. Molly, positioned at her sentry post on the western perimeter, was the first to detect the subtle wrongness that heralded the creature's approach. Her entire body tensed suddenly, bioluminescent markings along her temples dimming as if instinctively hiding from a threat. "He comes," she whispered, but in the preternatural quiet her words carried to Carl's position with unnerving clarity, like stones dropped into still water. Carl raised his hand, signaling the silent alarm, not the blaring horn that had announced the flesh rippers, but a system of drum patterns that conveyed specific information about the nature and location of the threat. Without revealing their readiness, the message spread through the village with remarkable speed, each sentry passing it along the chain of communication until every defender knew precisely what approached and from which direction. Warriors moved to their assigned positions with silent efficiency, their weeks of drilling evident in their coordinated movements and calm demeanor. Despite the impending danger, families retreated to the innermost shelters built specifically for this purpose, fortified structures where non-combatants could remain relatively secure during the coming battle. Carl moved to the forward defensive line, his bone sword gleaming dully in the merged light of the three moons, his heart pounding with a terrible mixture of anticipation, fear, and the burning desire for vengeance that had sustained him through the darkest periods of his grief. After months of preparation, training, and waiting, he would finally face the destroyer of his world, the murderer of his family. Whatever the outcome, that confrontation represented a necessary culmination of the journey that had begun the moment he found the ruins of his former life. The first sign of the beast's imminent arrival was a subtle trembling of the ground beneath their feet, almost imperceptible at first, then gradually increasing until small pebbles visibly vibrated and water in collection. Vessels rippled with each approaching step. Trees at the edge of the western clearing began to sway slightly, not from wind but from the passage of something massive moving between them with deliberate stealth, and then it emerged into the moonlight, the shade Beast was even more terrifying than Carl's tormented memories had painted it. Standing fully upright, it towered at least twice the height of a human male. Its massive body a complex interplay of corded muscle and shadow-like fur that seemed to absorb and distort light, rather than reflect it normally. Its limbs combined the worst aspects of predatory anatomy: the powerful hindquarters of a hunting cat, the grasping foreclaws of a bear, all scaled to monstrous proportions. But it was the eyes that froze the blood in Carl's veins, glowing red orbs that pulsed with undeniable malevolent intelligence, scanning the village defenses with calculated assessment, rather than mindless aggression. Those eyes moved methodically across the defensive perimeter, lingering on concealed trap mechanisms as if somehow sensing their presence despite careful camouflage. Then that burning gaze found Carl, and a rumbling growl emerged from deep within the creature's massive chest, a sound that contained too much focused hatred to be mere animal aggression. It remembers me, Carl realized with a chill of horrified understanding. This was no simple predator operating on instinct, but something with memory, purpose, and the capacity for targeted vengeance, qualities that made it infinitely more dangerous than any natural hunter. The attack came with explosive speed that belied the creature's enormous size. The shade beast launched itself at the outer wall, its massive form crashing through the wooden barrier as if it were made of dried grass rather than the reinforced timber the Zella had laboriously constructed. Warriors scattered according to their training, regrouping at secondary positions while showering the monster with arrows from multiple angles, but the shade beast seemed barely to notice the projectiles penetrating its hide. It swatted Zella warriors aside with casual brutality, focused entirely on reaching Carl with single-minded determination. This wasn't just an attack on a settlement, it was a deliberate hunt with a specific target, and Carl was the prey it sought above all others. Carl held his ground at the designated killing zone they had prepared, bone sword raised in a guard position, muscles tensed for the coming clash. When the beast charged, he dodged with the agility born of months of intensive training, slashing at its flank as it passed with a blow that would have crippled any normal predator. The bone blade bit deep, drawing a spray of phosphorescent purple blood that glowed eerily in the moonlight. First blood, a significant achievement against such a formidable opponent, but far from a killing blow. The beast roared in pain and rage, spinning with shocking speed to face Carl again, hatred blazing in those ember-like eyes. The battle transformed into a deadly dance of strike, dodge, and counter-strike. Carl used his intimate knowledge of the defensive layout to full advantage, leading the shade beast through carefully orchestrated sequence of prepared killing grounds. One by one, traps were triggered with precision timing. A net of poison-treated vines entangled the beast's massive legs momentarily. Counterweighted spike logs descended from concealed positions in the trees, driving hardened points into the creature's armored back. Each trap slowed or injured the shade beast temporarily, but failed to stop its relentless pursuit of Carl. Throughout the chaotic engagement, Carl remained acutely aware of Mealy and the other archers, their arrows finding vulnerable points, eyes, throat, joint articulations with remarkable precision. Despite the frenzied movement of their target, the shade beast was accumulating Damage, its movements becoming marginally slower, its attacks slightly less coordinated, but so too was Carl. Tiring, his exceptional clear's throat. Human endurance stretched to its limits. By the intensity of the conflict, then, disaster struck with devastating suddenness. The beast, enraged beyond measure by its accumulating injuries, unleashed a backhanded sweeping blow that Carl failed to fully evade despite his combat experience. The massive clawed limb caught him across the chest and right shoulder, sending him flying through the air like a discarded doll. He crashed against the thick trunk of one of the village trees, the impact driving the air from his lungs in an explosive gasp and sending his bone sword spinning from his grasp into the underbrush. Pain exploded through Carl's body as he crumpled to the ground, every nerve ending screaming in protest at the damage inflicted. Through blurred vision, he saw the shade beast approach with deliberate slowness, savoring its apparent victory, triumphant malice gleaming in its fiery eyes. Carl struggled to rise, to reach his weapon, to continue the fight, but his battered body refused to fully respond, managing only to push him into a semi-upright position against the tree trunk. This was it then, the end he had once wished for in the depths of his grief, now feared because of what it would mean not just for him, but for Miley, for the Zila tribe that had accepted him, for the future he had reluctantly begun to envision beyond the all-consuming pain of his loss. The beast loomed over him, raising a massive clawed limb for the killing stroke, its jaws opening to reveal rows of serrated teeth in a grotesque parody of a triumphant smile. No, the scream cut through the chaos of battle like a physical force, high and clear and filled with a determination that transcended fear. You will not take him too, Miley stood between Carl and the advancing shade beast, her small blue form trembling visibly but planted firmly between predator and prey. In her hands she held not her usual bow but a ceremonial spear Carl had helped her craft, its shaft made from the hardest wood in the forest, its tip fashioned from a particular bone, carefully shaped and hardened through a complex process involving fire and mineral treatments, coated with the deadliest neurotoxin the forest provided, extracted from rare plants that grew only in the most inaccessible ravines. Miley, run, Carl gasped through the pain, desperate to save her from the fate that seemed inevitable. Get away from it now. She ignored his command completely, her focus entirely on the massive predator before her. The shade beast paused momentarily, seeming almost confused by this tiny obstacle that had placed itself in its path. In that critical moment of hesitation, Miley acted with a speed and precision that would have impressed the most seasoned colonial security operative. She darted forward, her movement a blur of blue skin and white hair weaving under the beast's instinctive defensive swipe with preternatural grace, the ceremonial spear in her hands thrust upward with perfect placement, finding the soft underside of the shade beast jaw where the armor was thinnest, penetrating deep into the vulnerable flesh beneath. The beast roared in agony and rage, rearing back and swinging wildly at the small target that had already danced away from its reach. Purple blood poured from the wound in pulsing gouts, glowing with bioluminescent intensity in the darkness. More significantly, the potent neurotoxin was entering its bloodstream, beginning the process of degrading its nervous system coordination. Carl watched in awe as Molly continued to evade the increasingly disoriented creature's attacks, leading it step by calculated step away. From where he lay injured, her movements displayed a perfect integration of the combat training he had provided in her natural Zila agility, creating a fighting style that was neither purely human nor alien, but something new and remarkably effective. With a jolt of realization that cut through his pain-induced mental fog, Carl understood what she was doing, the direction she was purposefully leading the beast, the tactical end game. She was executing with flawless precision despite her youth and the mortal danger surrounding her. The ravine trap, he murmured through bloodied lips, recognition dawning. The final defensive measure they had prepared. A deep natural fissure at the edge of the village clearing widened and deepened through weeks of careful excavation, lined with dozens of hardened stakes coated with the same neurotoxin that was currently working its way through the shade beast. Massive body. The pit had been concealed beneath covering of branches, leaves, and soil, engineered to collapse under significant weight while appearing solid to visual inspection. Gathering his remaining strength through sheer force of will, Carl pushed himself upright, ignoring the screaming protest. From his injured body, he staggered forward, retrieving his fallen bone sword from where it had landed during his violent impact with the tree. Every movement was agony, but he forced himself to follow Molly and the beast, determined to ensure that her brave gambit was not wasted. The shade beast, increasingly affected by the neurotoxin and fixated on the elusive blue figure that continued to inflict painful jabs with her spear whenever it slowed, failed to notice the changed texture of the ground beneath its massive paws as Molly led it ever closer to the concealed pit. With one final, perfectly timed feint, she positioned herself just beyond the camouflaged edge, intentionally allowing herself to appear momentarily vulnerable. The beast charged forward with a triumphant roar that transformed mid-motion into a howl of surprise as the ground gave way beneath it. The carefully constructed covering collapsed precisely as designed, plunging the massive predator downward into the spiked pit below. Its howl was cut brutally short as dozens of poison stakes penetrated its body from multiple angles, the impact driving the sharpened points deep into vital areas. Carl reached the edge of the pit just as the beast fell, his body running purely on adrenaline and determination. Without hesitation, he raised his bone sword high above his head, and with a primal cry that contained all his accumulated grief, rage, and pain, delivered a final, powerful blow to the creature's exposed skull as it thrashed among the stakes. Below, the blade cleaved deep into the shade beast's head, penetrating what passed for a brain in the monstrous creature. A violent shudder passed through its massive frame, and then it went still, the glow in its hateful red eyes dimming and finally extinguishing like embers deprived of oxygen. A terrible, profound silence descended over the battlefield. The shade beast, the monster that had haunted Carl's nightmares, that had taken everything he loved, that had threatened to destroy his newfound purpose, was dead. Carl staggered back from the pit's edge, his sword slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers as the adrenaline that had sustained him began to ebb, allowing the full extent of his injuries to register in his consciousness. His legs buckled beneath him, and he would have fallen if not for the surprisingly strong arms that suddenly supported him from the side. Molly had appeared beside him, her small form somehow providing the stability he needed to remain upright. Her face and arms were scratched and bleeding purple from near misses during the battle, but her eyes shone with fierce triumph and concern as she helped him move away from the pit to a fallen log where he could sit. "You," Carl whispered, his voice hoarse with pain and emotion. "You saved me." Again. Around them, the surviving Zella warriors gathered, their faces reflecting a complex mixture of awe, relief, and sorrow for those who had fallen in the battle. Several were injured, supporting each other as they approached the site of their final victory. Eldarin, who had coordinated the non-combatants' protection during the conflict, emerged from the inner village, leaning heavily on his ceremonial staff. "The shadow is gone," the elder said solemnly, placing a wrinkled blue hand on Carl's shoulder with gentle pressure. "Because of you, Carl of Earth, because of Molly, daughter of our tribe, because of all who stood together against the darkness that threatened to consume our world." Carl nodded weakly, unable to summon words adequate to the moment. The triumph he had anticipated feeling at the Shade Beast's death was present but muted, tempered by exhaustion, pain, and the sobering knowledge that victory had come at significant cost. Several Zella warriors had been killed outright during the battle, while others had sustained injuries that might yet prove fatal despite their healers' skills. More fundamentally, he realized with mild surprise, killing the creature had not erased the grief of losing Sarah and Emma. That wound remained, perhaps always would. Yet something had changed within him during the desperate battle. A shift he could not yet articulate but felt deeply in the core of his being. Something had been resolved, not through vengeance itself, but through the act of protecting others from suffering a similar fate. The days following the Shade Beast's defeat brought a mixture of celebration and mourning to the Zella village. Victory ceremonies honored both the living warriors who had fought bravely and the fallen who had made the ultimate sacrifice for their communities. Survival. Funeral rites, beautiful in their solemn dignity, sent the deceased on their journey to what the Zella called the upper forest, where ancestors dwelled among the stars. Carl's injuries, while serious, proved non-fatal thanks to the remarkable healing knowledge of the tribe's medicine practitioners. Poultices made from forest plants accelerated tissue regeneration, while teas brewed from specific fungi combinations managed pain and prevented infection more effectively than many colonial medical supplies he had encountered. Throughout his recovery, Molly remained a constant presence at his side, assisting the healers and ensuring Carl followed their instructions with the same gentle stubbornness she had displayed since their first meeting. In quiet moments between treatments, she would tell him stories from Zella tradition or describe the changes already occurring in the forest now that the Shade Beast's malign influence had been removed. The small singers have returned to the western groves, she reported one evening, referring to the insect-like creatures whose melodic sounds had been notably absent during the Shade Beast's approach. And the morning flowers are opening fully again, no longer hiding their colors from the sun. The forest remembers its proper patterns. When disruption passes, the victory celebration, when Carl had recovered enough to participate, was deliberately subdued, joyful but tempered by respect for the sacrifices made. The central fire burned higher than usual, illuminating the gathered tribe as they shared a feast prepared from the most prized forest delicacies. Stories were exchanged, songs performed, and a ceremonial dance enacted to honor both the warriors and the forest that sustained them. Carl sat slightly apart from the main celebration, his body still healing, his mind processing the monumental changes he had experienced since arriving in this alien community. Miley approached, carrying 2 cups of steaming liquid that released a now familiar aromatic scent. "Nibloom tea," she said with a small smile, offering him one of the cups. "For when the spirit needs healing as much as the body." Carl accepted it with a nod of thanks, making room for her on the log where he sat. They watched the 3 moons of this alien world rise over the treetops, casting their combined silvery blue light over a village forever changed by the events of recent weeks. The largest moon, deep crimson in color, seemed to hang directly above the ravine, where the shade beast's remains now lay, covered with stones in what the Zilla considered a necessary precaution against its spirit returning to trouble the living. "I keep thinking about Sarah," Carl said, suddenly surprising himself by speaking his wife's name aloud for the first time since describing his loss to Elder in months earlier. "About Emma, about what they would think of all this, of what I've become, of the choices I've made since losing them." Mealy listened silently, recognizing the significance of this moment, allowing him to find the words that had been locked inside for so long. "I couldn't save them," he continued, his voice catching slightly before steadying again with conscious effort. "I wasn't there when they needed me most, when that thing came for them. That failure has been consuming me from within, driving everything I've done since that day." He took a deep breath, organizing thoughts that had been chaotic for so long. "But today, when that beast had me cornered, when I thought I was going to die as they did, I realized something important. I didn't want death anymore. I wanted to live." He turned to face Mealy directly, his expression intense with newfound clarity. "Not just for revenge, not just to kill the creature, but for this place, for these people." His hand gestured toward the celebrating tribe members. "For you who saved me in more ways than you can possibly understand. I wanted to live for what might still be possible, not just die for what was lost." Mealy's small blue hand found his larger scarred one, her touch gentle but surprisingly strong, a physical connection that somehow embodied the more profound bond that had formed between them across the species barrier. "Then live, Carl," she said simply, the wisdom in her young voice striking him anew. "That is how you truly honor them. Not by joining them in death, but by carrying their memory forward in a life well lived. By becoming someone they would recognize and be proud of, despite the changes grief has wrought in you." The simple, profound truth of her words sank deep into Carl's wounded soul. For the first time since finding the ruins of his family home, he felt something fundamental shift within him. Not healing completely, not yet, but the beginning of acceptance, an acknowledgement that life continued, that purpose could be found again. that connections with others remained possible despite the scars left by loss. The dawn following the celebration found the village already busy with reconstruction efforts. The damage inflicted during the battle was substantial, but the Zella approached the work with renewed vigor and purpose, rebuilding their damaged homes and strengthening their defenses against the lesser threats that still prowled the forest. Carl joined the efforts despite his injuries, finding that physical labor provided a welcome focus for his mind and a tangible way to contribute to the community that had accepted him so completely. As the day progressed, he found himself working alongside Zella warriors who had fought beside him, sharing moments of camaraderie that transcended their profound biological differences. By midday, he found himself drawn to a high platform that overlooked both the village below and the broader forest landscape beyond. Miley joined him there, somehow sensing his need for perspective, both literal and figurative. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the activity below as the Zella community worked with coordinated efficiency to restore what had been damaged and improve what had merely been functional. The morning light bathed everything in a golden glow filtered through the forest canopy, transforming the alien landscape into something undeniably beautiful, rather than merely strange or threatening. Carl found himself seeing the world through new eyes, not the desperate vision of a man seeking death, nor the tactical assessment of a warrior preparing for battle, but the appreciative gaze of someone who had rediscovered the possibility of belonging. "What will you do now?" Miley asked. After several minutes of shared contemplation, her voice gentle but direct as always. "Will you return to your own people at the great settlement beyond the mountains? Now that the Eater of Light is defeated, the journey would be safer than before." Carl considered the question with genuine deliberation rather than the immediate rejection such a suggestion would have provoked months earlier. His original settlement lay in ruins. True, but the main colonial base remained operational many kilometers away, a human outpost of technology and familiar customs. He could return, rejoin human society, perhaps even find a meaningful role within the colonial infrastructure, given his unique experience with the planet's indigenous population. But as his gaze moved across the Zella village, observing the people who had become his students, his comrades, his friends, the community that had embraced him despite his differences, he knew with quiet certainty where his future lay. "My people are here now," he said, simply, the words feeling right as he spoke them. Miley's face brightened with undisguised joy at his decision, her bioluminescent markings glowing more intensely with her emotional response. She took his hand, her small blue fingers intertwining with his weathered human ones in a gesture that perfectly symbolized the bridge they had built between their worlds. "We will build something good here," she declared with the absolute conviction that only youth can fully embody. Something that honors those who have gone before while creating new patterns for those who will come after. Something that combines the strength of your people's knowledge with the wisdom of ours. Carl squeezed her hand gently, allowing himself to believe in her vision of the future despite the lingering shadows of his past. Life would never be what it once had been. The grief and guilt would never completely disappear. The memories of Sarah and Emma would always occupy a sacred space within his heart. But standing here with this remarkable child who had pulled him back from the abyss of self-destruction, Carl felt something he had thought forever lost to him. Hoping. Yes, he agreed, a genuine smile slowly forming on his face for the first time in longer than he could remember. We'll build it together, day by day. Below them, the village continued its work of renewal, blue-skinned aliens and one human forging a shared destiny on this wild, unforgiving, yet undeniably beautiful world. Birds called from the forest canopy. Small creatures rustled through the underbrush, and the three moons hung faintly visible in the daytime sky. Life continuing its eternal patterns, despite the changes wrought by recent events. We will live, Mealy, Carl said softly, speaking both a promise and a realization. Together, if you like this story, click the hype button. This video deserves to be popular. Have a nice day.